Want to look at some do file essentials. First, we'll discuss a couple of shortcuts that we can use in do files. Here, CTRL plus A allows you to select the entire do file like this with selecting everything in the do file. CTRL plus L allows you to select line where your cursor is at. So if my cursor is over here, we'll select this line. If my cursor is over here, we'll select this line, right? So we can either select the entire do file with CTRL plus A, or we can use CTRL plus L to select the line where our cursor is at. CTRL plus D allows you to execute selected portion, right? It allows you to run that particular command in the do file. If I want to run the entire do file, I'll do CTRL plus A, then I'll select CTRL plus D. If I want to run a particular code of line in my do file, I'll just select that particular line where my cursor is at. Like for example, you wanted to run this part of the do file, for example, so we would have done CTR plus L, and then we would have selected CTR plus D. Instead of running the entire do file, we can also execute a particular portion of the do file. So CTRL-A allows us to select the entire do file. CTRL-L allows us to select a particular line where the cursor is at, and CTR plus D, whichever part you've selected, allows you to execute it. CTRL plus H is fine replaced like this. Tab allows you to indent. So if I do tab, it's allowing me to indent like this, right? So these are shortcuts in the do file that we can use. Then how do we open two do files simultaneously? So what you do is you have two do files open. Like over here we have untitled 1 and untitled 2 open. We know from file you can either open a new do file or open an existing do file. So if you want to open two do files simultaneously, what you do is you have opened these two like over here, and then you drag one to the screen like this, and then you can tell Stata, do you want horizontal tab group or vertical tab groups? If I say vertical tab groups, in this way we can open two do files simultaneously. And if you don't want them open simultaneously like this, just go back and drag it back over here like this. So this is a nice way you can open two do files simultaneously. Open two and then just drag one to the screen like this. You can choose vertical or horizontal tab group like this. Right. So next thing we want to look at how to take a code over multiple lines in Stata. But I want to write one line. I'm writing a code and I don't want to just write it in one line. I want to write that same code over multiple lines in the do file. This is very relevant when you're writing a code for graphs and tables, as these commands are very long, right? So just take it on the next line, guys. So how can we write a code over multiple lines in a do file? So method one is that you put these three slashes at the end of each line to continue the code to the next line. Basically, when you put these three slashes at the end of the line, it tells Stata, I'm continuing this command onto the next line. And here you need to make sure you put a space before the slashes, and you don't put the three slashes on the last line, because obviously over there you're ending the code, you're not continuing it on the next line. For example, instead of writing one very long line like this, right? So we've written one line of code. We can write it the same code over multiple lines. What you can do is when you're writing multiple lines, like I wanted to write this part and then I wanted to continue this code on to the next. I want Stata to not read this as one separate line of code, this is one separate line. No, I want Stata to read all three of these. Although this code is written on three lines, but I want Stata to treat it as just one line of code, this like this over here written. So for this, what I do is, so at the end of each line, we write these three backward slashes. This tells Stata that I'm continuing this code onto the next line. And you make sure you put a space before it. And then again, over here, this tells Stata I'm continuing it onto the next line. And once you've written the last part of it, so you don't have to put three slashes over here because you're not continuing into the next line. You just stop over here. So in this way, instead of writing just one entire long line, you can write the code over multiple lines, and Stata will read it as one line of code instead of three different lines of code. Use the method two to do the same thing that you want to take the code of multiple lines is to use delimit. Now, what over here we need to understand what a delimiter is. A delimiter is a character that tells Stata where a command ends. It tells Stata, okay, if I see this limiter is the character that tells Stata where a command ends. Right? So basically, wherever Stata sees delimiter, it will assume the command is ended, and then you have the next command that follows. The default behavior is normally Stata ends a command when you press enter. So the delimiter is enter key by default. Usually what Stata does it assumes that once you pressed enter, that this is one line of code and the next is other line of code. This is what Stata assumes. So if I want to write a command over multiple lines, we'll change the delimiter to a semicolon, and after finishing, we'll switch back to enter root. So the syntax will be like this. We'll write delimit over here and then we'll put a semicolon. This is telling Stata the delimiter is now a semicolon instead of enter. So it is telling Stata that now the character that is going to specify where a command ends is no longer the enter key, it's a semicolon. So you will not, so you will read everything as one line of command until you see the semicolon. Because usually what Stata does is as soon as you press enter, it assumes the next line is the next line of code is a new command. The next line is a new code of is a new command. Right, but here we're telling Stata okay, until you see a semicolon again, this particular line is telling Stata that until you see a semicolon again, read everything as one line of code. So I can write my entire code over here, and then when I'm done, I'll just put another semicolon, tells Stata, okay, now this is a sign that the line of command is ended, right? So anything that you write in the middle over here, Stata will read it as one line of command. And then in the end, you go back to the enter rule by writing this delimit CR. So for example, if I wanted to continue the same example, and we saw how we can write this over, we can take this code over multiple lines by either putting these slashes at the end of each line to tell Stata that I want to continue the command onto the next line, or we can use delimit. So here what I do is first I tell Stata that the delimit. So here we're telling Stata that now the delimiter is no longer the enter key, but it's a semicolon. So until you see another semicolon, treat every single thing that we've written over here as one piece of command, even though it's written over multiple lines, right? So over here, notice I've written all of them over multiple lines, but until Stata sees a semicolon, it's going to treat this as one line of a command, right? It's going to treat this as one line of command, right? So over here, once it sees the semicolon, so now Stata knows that here you change the delimiter to semicolon, and here the semicolon ended. So Stata is going to treat all of this as one command, and then in the end you switch back to enter rule using this. Now next thing is, so this is how you can write a code over multiple lines. You either put 3 slashes at the end of each line or use delimit, where you change the delimiter to a semicolon so that Stata reads whatever you write next as one line of code. In the end, after you're finished, you just change back to the enter rule, which you can do using this. You can change the font size in files as well. You can go to edit and you can go to preferences here, and you can change the font size if you want from here, and you can change the font name and all of this as well. Right. The last thing that you want to look at, how do we add comments in files? A method one is comments. We can see this was the line of code, right? Whatever is appearing in green are your comments, right? How do you add those in files to improve readability of your file? Method one is you can use an asterisk, but this has to be used at the beginning of a line. Asterisks can only be used to add commands at beginning of line using an asterisk. Method two is we can use 2 slashes. Now 2 slashes can be used at the beginning of line or the end of command as well. If you're using it at the end of the command, make sure you put a space before the slash if it comes after a command. If it comes at the end of a, if it comes at the end of a command, so you make sure you put it. So basically a 3. So here just keep in mind the 3 slashes. If you're putting it at the end of a line of a code that tells Stata to continue the command onto the next line. But if you just wanted to add a comment, right, at the end of a code, like over here, I wanted to add a comment. So see, we'll put 2 slashes, right, and they'll appear green like this. You know, like you can see, this is telling Stata that this is a comment I want to add at the end of a command, right? So there's difference between using 2 slashes and using 3 slashes, right? So there is a difference here, right? Like over. So when you're using 3 slashes, you're telling Stata to continue the command on the next line. And if you're using 2 slashes, you're just writing a comment. Okay, so method 3 is if you want to write a multi-line comment. So we can use, for a multi-line comment, we can put a slash and then a asterisk. And then we write our comments over here. And then we end it with a slash and asterisk.